Sometimes hourly rate might be $2 when it all averaged out. It was always below minimum wage. But when you need to keep your heat on and your lights on and your rent paid, you do what you have to do and you take those lower paying tasks. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually making my medical conditions worse. Nobody is meant to be hunched over a keyboard for that many hours a day, days in a row, sleep being interrupted, and just nobody is meant to do that.
You have never met this woman. Her name is Krystal Kaufman, but you have almost certainly used a product that she helped to build. For years, she was an AI data worker, a data labeler. She made almost no money. She toiled away on menial data tasks to help create the magic of generative AI. Although the way Krystal sees it, there's no magic here, not really.
These big tech companies want you to believe that AI is magic, that all of these things are magic. And in reality, there is a global hidden workforce that scrubs the internet so we don't have to witness the worst things you can imagine. They're a global workforce that makes the Alexas and the Siris and all of those things work properly. And it is very much hidden by design to keep this illusion alive.
Well, today we are going to peel back the curtain and look closer at this magic trick. Because most magic tricks, of course, have a secret. And in this case, you could argue the secret of Gen AI's magic is the invisible army of human data labelers. We'll be unpacking this on the People's AI podcast, presented by the Vana Foundation. I'm your host, Jeff Wilser, a longtime journalist and the producer and host of the AI Summit at Consensus. And I'm proud to partner with Vana to bring you this season of the People's AI. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty and user ownership. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. Learn more at vana.org. So let's start with a baseline, the basics. What exactly is data labeling? Well, for decades, it has been crucial to the development of AI.
There's no way to get there without it. So there's no way to get to where we are without labeling, because labeling is the only way we have to teach.
This is Graham Morehead, who teaches AI at Gonzaga University, gives TEDx talks on AI, and advises startups on AI. Now, exactly how or if data labeling is used depends on the type of AI development, but as Graham explains, broadly speaking, the space has needed it since its inception.
Labeling has always been part of the mix. It depends what you're doing. There's a big project at Brown University. Basically, they got grant money and paid a bunch of students, probably some grad students, to just label tons of data. Like take tons of newspaper articles and go, this is a noun, this is a verb, this is an adjective, and just, it must have been excruciating. But doing all that gave us experience in understanding why language models do what they do.
Data labeling has changed over the years, and it has been used at various points of time for different aspects of AI training and development.
In the late 90s, there would be low-paid people, and I was one of them, who would just be sitting at a computer labeling either text or whatever it is you're working on. For images, it was simple black and white images. You may have heard of something called MNIST, which is an early data set of handwritten digits that humans said, okay, that's a 7, that's a 5, that's an 8, and then we train an AI. This is an example for students now, but back at some point, it was cutting edge.
Now, in some ways, at times, data labeling has come from a surprising source. You. I can almost guarantee that you have worked as a data labeler and you have not been paid a nickel for it. Here's Graham again.
In 2012, everything changed because of something called the ImageNet moment. AI, specifically this model called AlexNet, which I think was Jeffrey Hinton's and Ilya Sutskever, who started OpenAI. I think they were on that team. They developed a neural network that could beat everybody at the task of looking at an image and describing what's in it. Now, the only reason we know that they did well is because humans tagged all those images, the ImageNet database. Now, a lot of that did come from the internet, those alt tags and, other sources too. But also another trend you saw in the early 2000s was captchas. Please click all the things where there's a street light or type in the numbers you see. Sometimes it's using it to determine if you're a human. Other times you are the labeler.
So we were data labeling the millions,
Yes.
hundreds
Billions.
of millions, perhaps billions of
Yeah.
us. We were unwittingly giving ourselves as free labor
Yes.
to help train these AI models.
Yep.
Incredible.
The brilliant idea of Louis von Ahn at Carnegie Mellon. Brilliant idea.
Without getting too deep in the weeds here, not all AI systems require the same type of data labeling, and some require very little explicit labeling at all. One of the big shifts with large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, is that they sort of teach themselves patterns from massive amounts of text rather than us telling them, this is a dog, this is a cat for every line. But that does not mean that humans are out of the loop or off the hook from the menial, tedious data work. Enter the world of reinforcement learning with human feedback, or RLHF.
So the language model itself is just a next word predictor. And it's trained on just huge amounts of text, which in a sense is a label where a human gave you a string of letters, string of words, right? And each one is a label as the next word. But there's something separate. They started to realize very early on, 2022, 2023, that these systems produce unsafe output. They tell little kids how to build a bomb, things like that, or how to make drugs. So they said, we need another system after the LLM that will determine if it's safe. And they call that reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF. And that's where you started to have, this is just 2023 when this really exploded. OpenAI supposedly had thousands of people, a lot of them across South America and Africa, that were looking at output and grading it from 1 to 5 to indicate whether it's safe or not.
Which gets us to the question, who are the people, the actual human beings, who are doing much of this menial data labeling and data feedback? To the extent that we ever think about this issue, which is rare, we just hear vaguely about, quote, low-paid workers, and we kind of leave it at that. So today, I want to do the exact opposite. I wanted to have a real extended conversation, not with some abstract army of workers, but one very human AI data worker, and have that be a window into what this world is like, how it's evolving, and maybe how it needs to change.
I was in my early 30s. Seemingly overnight, I became sick. And when I say sick, I mean problems with heart rate, problems with fainting, all kinds of very strange things. And very quickly, it became apparent that doctors didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't work outside of my home at that time. So my bills still needed to be paid.
This gets us back to Krystal Kaufman. Now, Krystal had never intended to get into AI data labeling. Most people don't. In her 20s, she worked in politics, doing campaign management and fundraising and things like that. She went back to school to study geology. She lived in Michigan, and in 2015, well before remote work became normalized with COVID, she was looking for gigs she could do from home. And she heard about an intriguing new job that she could do from home, something called Amazon Mechanical Turk.
So Amazon Mechanical Turk was the first platform of its kind that offered customers an opportunity to list work to be done, similar to outsourcing, but on this platform. And workers like me could sign up and become qualified to do these jobs. And so you had one side requesters who were individuals, companies. At the time, Google even used Amazon Mechanical Turk. And then the other side, workers spread all around the world, working from their homes. Each task was paid individually. Sometimes it was as little as 1 penny per task. Sometimes you could get lucky and you hit a survey that might have been $5. It was low paying, but if you worked efficiently and learned all you could, it did pay the bills.
So Krystal began earning $1 here, a few bucks there. It wasn't much, but hey, she had medical bills to pay, and this was paying the bills, sort of. And eventually, she found herself part of building AI systems that you have definitely heard of.
So I became what is called a Turker, and Turkers had a variety of work available. Back then, there was more of a variety. Academic surveys, psychology departments, sociology departments, things like that. There were things that were leading towards AI and building large language models, analyzing sentiment, helping something. We were never told what we were working on. So helping something to be able to recognize patterns in speech or images, tagging images, all these things that we know now went into a lot of products we know and use today. I was asked, for example, to ask the same question 3 times in a different way. And I know now that I was working on Alexa. There were so many different kinds of questions. It could be something like, where's the nearest bank to me? And then I would have to type in 3 different responses. If a response had already been used, it would say, try again. So they amassed these huge lists of different ways to ask the same thing. What bank is located the closest to my home? What bank is within driving distance of area code, 0000? What is the closest bank to me avoiding highways?
So every time you use Alexa, in some tiny way, you have Krystal to thank. And she'll never know it for sure, but she thinks it's possible she helped train another well-known AI system, one that cost around $50,000. And of course, she was paid a few pennies, maybe if she was lucky, $6.
There was a lot of what's called data labeling, and that would be being presented with an image, and the instructions would say, mark every car you see in this photo, mark every person you see in this photo, which interestingly enough, and I can't say there's a connection here, but now seeing technologies in Teslas, for example, where they have screens that show all the cars and all the people around in real time in these street scenes seems very familiar. Was it Tesla? I will never know.
Now, this next bit sort of reminds me of an old 80s comedy underground classic, one of Val Kilmer's early films called Real Genius, where basically these college kind of kids, these brilliant college nerds, were doing all this science and math stuff. They didn't realize until later they were building this laser that could be used to assassinate people for the military. And like, oh my God, we're building serious, arguably awful weaponry, right? This was a comedy. This was a movie. This is fictional. This is fake. Less funny and less fake was how these AI data workers can be building systems that they are not sure about the ethical endgame. They're not quite sure what they're contributing to. And Krystal got a sense of that in a very unsettling way.
There was a company that posted aerial photographs, and the tasks were often to mark where you see nesting cranes was one of them, or seals. And it seemed very benign, right? It seemed like there was somebody out there trying to track wildlife. It seemed like a very good thing. And then one day I had instructions to mark border crossings, but not traditional border crossings that we know that we cross through when we travel. They were looking for footprints, foot trails, tire tracks, very in a remote area. It looked to be a desert-like area. Again, I wasn't told where or why. And I did one, and then I started to wonder, what am I doing? If I mark this, are they sending people there to help? Or am I responsible for somebody being detained or harmed? And it was that task where I did have this moment where I questioned what I was doing and why, and it made me look at everything entirely different.
As Krystal began taking a closer look at this world, meanwhile, the day-to-day of the job itself was not all it cracked up to be. I asked her what her 9-to-5 was like, and she laughed at the very idea of a 9-to-5 was preposterous. In a sense, she was turking, sometimes for pennies, 24/7.
If I get up in the morning, I turn my computer on, and I keep it on until I go to bed. Work hours, non-existent. All the hours were work hours. It is not uncommon, and it wasn't uncommon then, for people who were doing this to support themselves or their families to have this very same experience. And I would even set notifications overnight to sound, blare like an alarm, to let me know if a certain requester posted work, because I knew that work was better paying than most other work. So if that went off in the middle of the night, I got up and I did that. And the people that I was in these social media groups with, they were very much the same way. So it sounds like work from home, set your own hours. It sounds very, very perfect for a lot of people. But once you get into it and you realize how much of the work you have to do to make ends meet, you realize that you are working all the time. You're working from your phone in the line at the grocery store. It's hard to go out and have a social life. When I started, the golden rule, so to speak, and this again was 2015, it was don't accept anything less than 10 cents a minute. Even thinking about that isn't much. And sometimes hourly rate might be $2. Other times I had a really great task and my hourly rate was $15, $20 an hour. But when it all averaged out, it was always below minimum wage, even though the goal was always to at least be at minimum wage. But when you need to keep your heat on and your lights on and your rent paid, you do what you have to do and you take those lower paying tasks.
Krystal, just to be very dumb about this, am I right that the golden rule of 10 cents a minute, that equates to $6 an hour? And that was the golden rule. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you are. And that was, like I said, 2015, and that changed over time. And then people would say, I'm not taking anything less than minimum wage. And you try to stick to that the best you can, on principle, you want this to improve, you want these requesters to pay better, but then you also know that in your mind, you set a daily goal or a weekly goal. You know what you have to make to pay all of your bills. And when you know that you are a little bit short of that, you'll take stuff that falls below that.
Meanwhile, Krystal had taken this gig in the first place, in large part because of her medical condition. She then discovered a cruel irony.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually making my medical conditions worse. I wasn't, nobody is meant to be hunched over a keyboard for that many hours a day, days in a row, sleep being interrupted, and just nobody is meant to do that. And so it really did it was this vicious circle that I got stuck in, and I didn't realize it. I just knew my health was bad. To be completely transparent, I have something called POTS and something called EDS, or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, that causes a lot of pain in the joints. Things dislocate. And I was essentially I was increasing pain for myself. I was increasing a lot of my symptoms without realizing it because I had to pay my rent. So it just kept going in this circle, which is not uncommon. I hear a lot of people stuck in the circle of dependency on these platforms for a number of reasons. I didn't have much of a social life because of the health things I was going through. I was very much confined to my home. Going out was very difficult for me, but doing this work and worsening my symptoms essentially made it impossible. Psychologically, if you want to go to the grocery store, if you want to get away from your house for even a half hour, there's always this voice in the back of your head saying, but you're going to miss the work that pays well if you leave. And so if you do leave, it's having your phone with you. It's being somewhere where you have internet, which obviously is not a luxury that everybody has. And it is very much the work and the people that you might meet through the work ultimately become your life. And it's quite a change.
Around this time, Krystal realized a strange paradox, something that sounds absolutely wild. Compared to many of her colleagues doing this kind of data work, she had it good. She was lucky.
I started paying closer attention to all of the tasks that were out there and the qualifications that people needed to have to work on them and the distribution of the work around the world. And one thing that I noticed right away was that if you are in the United States, you are in the best position for the most work available. And this is kind of laughable to say it this way, but the best pay. The global north in general. However, the global south was a completely different story. I had a colleague, he is from Latin America, and he had maybe 5 tasks at a time available to him, whereas I had hundreds. There was an incident of noticing that there was a task listed multiple times, but it was multiple times because it was this task for people in the US, this task for people in Brazil, this task for people in, you get the idea. And so looking at those, the exact same task, the exact same work, everything, and the pay for those in the global south or global majority was significantly less. And that was something that I started noticing was not an isolated incident. And the big tech companies, along with the companies that use these services, took advantage of the fact that in Latin America, especially, the economic uncertainty, the hyperinflation kept people very dependent on trying to find any other way to make money. And they knew that they could drop the pay and people would still take it, and they exploited these people.
She did more research, swapping notes with data workers across the world, and got a better sense of where this is happening, or rather where it wasn't happening. She learned that the scope of this problem was staggering.
So I think most people would be shocked to learn that it is the majority of the world, the United States, but also Latin America, with Brazil being a country with a lot of data workers. I've met people from Venezuela, from Colombia. You worked with them. When it comes to the African continent, Kenya and Nairobi was and still is a center for these BPOs. India is huge also. There are a lot of workers in India. There is a market in China, although it is very secretive, and there is not nearly as much research out there about that as there is for other places in the world. But it's everywhere.
She saw particularly troubling conditions in Kenya, especially for content moderators, and I want to put a very real trigger warning for what Krystal shares next.
Kenya comes to mind first. Meta would outsource to a company called Sama or Sama Source, and they became very large in Kenya, and they would recruit people from all over, but they would go into particular slums and they would sell this dream of come work in tech. You have this job, you're going to make the internet safe for you and safe for your kids and your neighbors. And in some cases, visas were arranged, housing was arranged, all of these things were arranged, but dependent on the company.
Mm.
And that is problematic for a number of reasons.
Mm.
They essentially own your life at that point. You have to go to work and do this work. You have to, because now you have a visa to worry about. You have somewhere to live to worry about. There was somebody that we ran across through the Data Workers Inquiry Project that was moderating content from an active genocide taking place on the African continent. As he was moderating the content, and I just want to put a warning on this, a video came in front of him, and he saw his own cousin being murdered. And he was told by the management to basically suck it up and get back to work.
Oh my God.
There was no break given. There was no anything. And I can't imagine, even though I've heard these stories and I've talked to some of these people that have been through horrible things, I can't imagine what that must be like. The exploitation is very real. It is in Kenya as well, Nairobi. There, in addition to work from home platforms, there are things called BPOs, or business process outsourcing offices. And they are basically put in these old warehouses in Nairobi with these metal roofs, and they get so hot and so uncomfortable. And on the production floor, workers are moderating content for, say, Facebook or things like that, and they are seeing the absolute worst things you could possibly imagine. Basically, everything they viewed is very triggering, so I don't want to say the wrong thing. But I started to see people who were struggling with mental health and substance abuse and all of these things, and it was just very eye-opening. And also, as bad as I thought I might have it, or my colleagues in the global north, I realized that I was in an extremely privileged position.
Mm. You mentioned the golden rule of 10 cents a minute, and that often you'd have projects that pay less than $6 an hour. To your point, that was in the US. Can you share what the range was like in Kenya or Latin America in less fortunate areas?
Oh my gosh, pennies. I mean, a full day's work in Kenya in an office where there are set hours, $5 to $10 US, just very...
For a day's work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they often would run into situations where the management would say, yes, your 8 hours have passed, but we need to get this much work done. And you can either stay, do the work, not get paid for it, or you can go home and lose your job. So that hourly rate would drop when situations like that would come up too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all of these things are hidden, and these big tech companies want you to believe that AI is magic, that all of these things are magic. And in reality, there is a global hidden workforce that scrubs the internet so we don't have to witness the worst things you can imagine. They're a global workforce that makes the Alexas and the Siris and all of those things work properly. And it is very much hidden by design to keep this illusion alive.
Now, as Graham outlined up top, the exact type of data work or data labeling has shifted over time. And many of the truly brutal horror stories involve content moderation, which obviously is a bit different than AI data labeling in the classic sense. But the way Krystal sees it, from a wider perspective, this is all part of the larger world of pattern recognition. And ultimately, we still need human beings to make sure that AI is getting the patterns right.
So ultimately, all of these things are trying to make it so there's pattern recognition. AI right now is pattern recognition. People want to say it thinks, and people use words like, well, just like that, it thinks, it designed, it didn't. It recognized a pattern. So moderating, doing content moderation, doing data labeling, doing all the types of work is essentially adding to this base of knowledge that we have where a system can start to recognize patterns. And so that is, there is, again, this illusion being sold to us that it's all magic. And it's just not. And now it is interesting because now we have people using AI to generate content, which is something that is new, kind of uncharted, and that's going to lead into a whole other branch of research here. But it is interesting because now we are in a situation where at times we have, you think you're talking to a person, you're actually talking to a chatbot, but there are times when you're talking to a chatbot and you're actually talking to a person.
By a person, you mean the underpaid data labeler who's kind of
the exploited human being who is doing work for literal pennies for a big tech company that makes billions.
So after hearing from more and more of these stories around the globe, Krystal wanted to flip the script. She wanted to take action. She wanted to help find a solution. In 2020, she joined a team called Turkopticon and served as lead organizer.
This was a project started by two academics that was it was the first platform of its type. It was somewhere workers could go to rate the tasks that they worked on and the requesters they worked for and warn other workers. This does not pay well. This person rejects work. It was an early warning system of sorts. We started talking to workers and finding out what the common problems were, connecting workers to each other. Because one thing about a workforce that is spread all around the globe is that people feel very much alone, very much like they have no power, can't do anything to fight back against this. Again, by design, not by accident.
After helping to organize workers for years, Krystal is now research fellow at Distributed AI Research Institute, or DAIR, DAIR, which is one of a growing number of organizations worldwide trying to shed light on this issue and bring equity to underpaid workers.
It is my main project. It is called the Data Workers Inquiry. We take workers who want to raise awareness of what they're going through, and they investigate their own workplaces. They interview their own coworkers. They identify the problems and potential solutions. And it is a game changer because a researcher going in doesn't have the background, doesn't have the knowledge, the experience, all of the things. Whereas the workers in the thick of things absolutely do. And that is where this project has been groundbreaking. Honestly, so many things have been exposed. News journalists are picking up on this. This story is out there. Time has picked it up and you can find work on it. So it's something that is no longer hidden. And we're working to just keep blowing blowing the lid off of this stuff so people understand what's at stake here.
Even after many years of being a data worker herself, and then being a leader in this fight to unite workers, she still can find herself surprised at all the ethical questions raised by AI and data workers. After all, if an AI company wanted to hire a full-time employee in, say, Dallas, Texas, they wouldn't dare pay them below minimum wage. That's flat out illegal. Yet through the status quo, the baseline, they could somehow command a global army of dirt cheap workers.
I don't think there's an ethical question that it doesn't raise. But I think the biggest one is that how is this possible? And now we're in 2025 that these big tech companies, most of whom are based in the United States, in, California, in Seattle, are able to outsource their work not only to other countries, but also within the United States, and ignore the labor laws completely. There is, if you are an independent contractor, the laws change. It's very murky. It needs to be changed. But unfortunately, we have, of course, when you have billions of dollars, you can hire the very best lawyers to find every single loophole and exploit those loopholes. So we really need to take a look at how this is happening and why. I mean, obviously, money talks, and these companies have a ton of influence, especially with today's administration. But why and how is this happening? How is this possible?
Yeah.
And it's really disheartening. So I have worked with several politicians, have advised some staff for several politicians who want to look into this. I've testified in front of the European Parliament, and it takes time. This is a huge issue.
Despite all of this, and despite the billions and billions of dollars that the big tech companies have at their disposal, Krystal now sees more glimmers of hope.
So I know that so far this has sounded very doom and gloom, and I apologize for that. It is the reality of it, which we need to recognize, but we also need to look at all of the wonderful things that are happening right now. There are huge unionizing efforts underway on the African continent to help protect workers. There is the very first mental health initiative to help workers, specifically content moderators, get through what they have, what they've been subjected to. And there's more resistance. There are more politicians that are aware. And I think the way forward is just this, is to keep hounding this. Do not let it go back into, the shadows again. Keep pointing out what's happening. Keep working with the politicians. Legislation takes a very long time, and we know this. So while that's frustrating, it's still important to pursue that, but also approaching these companies without politicians, taking on these companies as a united front. It's going to take workers. It's going to take advocacy organizations, labor rights, human rights. I mean, labor rights are human rights. So it's going to take all of us working together to put pressure on these companies and saying, hey, this is not okay. And we're getting there. That is happening. And it's just not happening as fast as we would all like it to.
Yeah.
But I truly believe in my heart of hearts that this is going to improve, and that it is starting to improve. And workers who once thought that they were alone and powerless are now connected with one another and creating powerful, meaningful change. And that is a step that several years ago, I didn't know if that would happen. So I have hope. I have a lot of hope.
And as for Krystal herself, years after waking up at 3 a.m. in a panic, worried that she'll miss a, quote, high-paying $7 an hour data labeling job, now her life looks a lot different.
It is honestly like I'm living an entirely different life. Yes, I still have the health issues. They will never go away, but they're much more manageable. And I'm realizing that, like I said, I made things so much worse by shirking all these hours in the day. And so now I have a job that I love more than anything. I never thought I would be lucky enough to say I love my job, but I love my job. I love my colleagues. I feel very good about the work that I'm doing, and it gives me a sense of purpose, and it gives me hope for the future. I I travel, which is something I never thought I would be able to do again. And there are so many things that just as simple as driving my car some days or whatever, things that I had to learn how to get back, but I did get back. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunities that did come my way to start organizing and to start researching, because it has completely changed my life. And now I'm in a position where there are people out there who cannot speak out for whatever reason. And now it is my job to speak out to make sure that these people get their life back.
This larger story is far from over. It is also possible that there might be one more shift in the world of AI and data labeling. Ultimately, Graham reminds us that humans will always be needed to help give AI feedback. Humans will always be needed, to some extent, to label. Guess who else will be doing the work?
So we've already figured out, how to look at a letter or a number and know what it is. Now we've figured out how to look at a cat or a dog and know what it is. We've learned how to listen to speech and know what it says. We go up the stack to the more higher level things. And what we need humans for a long, long time is going to be aiming the AI at what is interesting. What should it do? Like when I think about AI music, after you listen to enough of it, you realize it's all kind of the same.
Yeah.
It is the average of all of humanity.
Yeah.
It would never have written Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Yeah.
Never. It would not have invented dubstep or rap. It would have done the average of what came before.
In this type of AI system, you and I will naturally, throughout the day, with our own feedback, our own labeling, we will help the AI figure out what's interesting. And as AI agents move from fringe pilot programs to becoming mainstream and useful, that too will require us to label.
You will be doing this yourself because we're all going to have some kind of AI agent, multiple agents. They'll be running on your phone and on your computer, and it's going to do right or wrong things, and you're going to label it as you go through the day.
So data labeling, while evolving, is not going away anytime soon. Nor will the human workers like Krystal, who are toiling away so we can use the quote magic of generative AI. But as Krystal says, in addition to the Distributed AI Research Institute, there are now more organizations like the Data Labelers Association in Kenya that are working to protect workers. The story is getting out. And it is my honor to help share these kinds of stories on the People's AI podcast, presented by the Vana Foundation. Vana is supporting the creation of a new internet, one rooted in data sovereignty and user ownership. Their mission is to create a decentralized data ecosystem where individuals, not corporations, govern their own data and share in the value it creates. And just my own personal editorializing here, it is these kind of issues we're covering today on this podcast about the current inequities of the way data is being obtained, the way data is being harnessed, the way big tech has all the power. That is the reason that Vana is doing what they are doing to help create data sovereignty, to help bring back equity. Learn more at vana.org. If this is your first time here at the People's AI, please consider subscribing. We're at all the usual platforms, and we're new and we're trying to get these stories out. So if you found this episode maybe important or thought-provoking, please do post it on social, share, send to a friend, send to someone who might be curious about these overlooked issues with AI. Thanks again so much, and see you next time.